My name is Josie Calder, and I'm 34 years old. 6 years after my mother told half of Weiser, Idaho that I'd turned my back on this family, my sister found my porch swing. It was a Thursday in October. I was grading one-act scripts at the kitchen table when the knock came, 3 soft raps, the kind a person gives when they're not sure they're allowed to knock harder. I opened the door, and there stood Tricia, my little sister, holding her phone in both hands like it might go off. She said my name, and then she looked past my shoulder into the living room, and every bit of color left her face. She backed off my porch steps without finishing whatever sentence she'd driven 4 hours to say, phone already rising to her ear. Mom, you need to sit down. She couldn't get any further than that. What my mother did with that phone call, and what I finally said into a microphone at Calder's Diner in front of 200 people who thought they knew me, is why I'm telling you this story tonight. Welcome back to the channel. If you've ever been the one who quietly holds a family together while nobody bothers to ask how you're holding up, stay with me because I think you'll recognize more of this than you'd like to. There's a house on Liberty Street in Boise with a porch swing painted the color of sea glass. Grady built it the spring we bought the place, out of leftover cedar fencing, and a Saturday he didn't need to give up. 2 coats of paint, a cheap brush, good light. He hung it from the porch beams himself, tested it with his full weight before he'd let me sit down. The way he tested everything, like the world owed him proof before it got his trust. Inside that house lives a 5-year-old named Wren, who believes ranch dressing is a food group and negotiates her bedtime like a union rep. I teach drama and stagecraft at a high school across town, which mostly means I referee glue guns and teenage heartbreak in equal measure. Some weeks I direct 3 one-acts and grade 40 scripts and still make it to pick up on time, and I don't know how, and I don't ask. Most nights I forget to eat dinner until Wren asks twice. I've watched 16-year-olds cry over a missed cue like it's the end of the world. Because for them, for 1 hour it is. My family taught me a version of that feeling a long time ago, except the stakes were never a play. Our life is small and specific. School, rehearsal, the library on Saturdays, the swing on Sunday mornings with coffee that goes cold, because Wren wants to be pushed exactly 11 times before she'll let me sit still. First, it was a rental. Then a mortgage I still can't quite believe a bank approved on a teacher's salary and a night class stipend. I painted every wall in that little house myself, but the swing is the only thing I ever really cared for. Sea glass green, touched up every April, the day after the last frost, same as always. In 6 years, nobody from Weiser had crossed under that porch roof. That wasn't an accident. It also wasn't the story my mother told about it. She said I'd cut this family off. Here's the thing about the phrase cut off. It puts the knife entirely in my hand. What actually happened is that I stopped covering the diner's light bill, and my family stopped being able to find me. The money is where this starts. It isn't where it ends, if I'm going to be exact about it, and I am, because I've had 6 years of practice. It started at my college graduation, 11 years ago, at a folding table set up in the back room of Calder's Diner after closing. The diner is the family business, opened by my grandfather in 1974, a chrome and red vinyl place on Main Street that my mother, Pam, took over when he passed, and that my father, Russ, has helped run for as long as I can remember, which mostly meant he fixed the grill and let my mother handle the books, or what she called books. That night, Mom made a sheet cake with my name spelled right, set my diploma up against the napkin dispenser like a centerpiece, and told everyone at the counter that her girl was the first Calder to finish a 4-year degree. My dad flipped the clothes sign and poured everybody coffee like it was champagne. Tricia, 17 then, ate most of the frosting off the corner she thought nobody was watching. For about 2 hours, I was the pride of that diner, and I would have promised almost anything to keep being that. I want you to remember that feeling, because my mother certainly did. After the cake was cut, she handed me a card. Yellow, with a cartoon graduation cap on the front, my name written across it in the loopy handwriting she used for the diner's specials board. I thought it was a congratulations card. Inside, in the same handwriting, for the walk-in cooler, since you're the one with the good job now. There was a number under that, not enormous, manageable for a girl 3 weeks out of college with a signing bonus from her first real teaching contract. She said it warm, patting my hand the way you'd pass someone a family recipe. Nobody at that counter blinked. My dad studied the grill like it needed studying. Trisha looked at the cake. I laughed a little because I thought I understood the arrangement. One favor once, the least I could do for the place that put cereal on my table as a kid. New teachers don't make much, but the walk-in was actually broken, and I was, after all, the one with the good job. I paid it out of my first paycheck. The next month, another card arrived at the apartment I shared with 2 other new teachers. My name in that same careful hand. The month after another, nobody asked out loud again after that first time. The asking had already happened once in public, dressed up as gratitude. That card was never meant to be a one-time thing. It was a subscription I didn't read the terms of, because the terms were written in a language I'd been raised to call family. By year 2, I'd switched us over to a standing transfer, because mailing cash felt absurd for a business 2 miles from my parents' house. The 15th of every month, money left my account before I was even awake. $300 most months, $600 in the bad ones. There was always a bad month coming. A new fryer. The walk-in again, because the first fix hadn't held. New tires for the delivery van that brought produce in from the farm stand. I paid for that van and felt something like pride about it. A daughter keeping her family's business running from 40 minutes away. Trisha's used Corolla when her stylist job started requiring reliable transportation. Birthday contributions on top of that. Christmas contributions, Easter, somehow too, though I've never understood what a diner needs for Easter. Meanwhile, on my side of the ledger, this is what it looked like: summer school stipends, every single year, because summer school paid extra and I never once said no to extra. Saturday tutoring for kids whose parents could afford it. Booked solid from September to May. My coworkers thought I was saving for a down payment on a bigger place. I was saving for something. I just couldn't have told you what, exactly, back then. I kept a running spreadsheet, updated to the dollar, not because I ever expected repayment, but because numbers were the one thing in that family that didn't shift depending on who was in the room. Words got slippery around my mother. Words like help and just this once and family looks out for family. Numbers held still. By year 5, the spreadsheet had 6 figures in it. I'll tell you the exact one later. I've said it out loud exactly once in my life, and when I tell you where, you'll understand why once was enough. One more thing about that walk-in cooler, since I paid for it twice. In a photo Trisha texted me one Thanksgiving, you could see past her into the kitchen, and there was a padlock and a hand-lettered sign on the cooler door, out of order, use ice chest. A year and a half after the second repair. I told myself repair shops in Weiser were slow. I told myself a lot of things back then. Telling myself things was cheaper than asking my mother direct questions. And in those years, I still believed I couldn't afford the answers. The lineman who came to restring power to the block behind our school was named Grady Pierce. 30 then forearms like a cartoon, a habit of humming while he worked that you could hear from the parking lot. He stopped me on my way to my car after a Thursday rehearsal to ask which building on campus lost power first during storms. Said the district needed better load data. I gave him what I remembered from 3 winters of blackout rehearsals, half distracted, and he wrote it down like it mattered, which apparently it did, because 2 weeks later, the auditorium had its own dedicated line. He asked me to coffee because, in his words, dinner was the middle of his workday. For 2 years he packed lunches for both of us and labeled mine with little jokes on the bag. When he proposed, there was no ring box. He handed me a cedar shim with a tiny hole drilled through it and a length of twine looped through, the same wood he'd used for the porch swing frame, and said the ring was coming. This was just so I'd know first. A scrap of wood instead of a diamond. I said yes to the scrap of wood. I brought him to Wiser exactly once. My mother asked what a lineman made an hour before she asked his last name. She asked whether the utility company covered dental. She asked who carried the health insurance. He answered all of it with that easy patience of his, and on the drive home he just said, "Your mom really likes numbers." He had no idea how right he was. I hadn't told him because I hadn't let myself add it up yet. That night, while he slept, my phone lit with a text from my mother, sent to me alone. "He seems solid, hon. Also, could you send a little extra this month? The propane bill came in high. Don't mention it to your dad. He worries." I stared at that message a long time. My engagement, it turned out, had a cover charge. I paid it. I want to be honest with you about that part. For 6 years, I always paid it. Then one November, a storm system rolled through the valley and knocked out 3 grid sectors at once, and Grady's crew worked back-to-back shifts, restoring lines in freezing wind. I came off my own long week, fell asleep with my phone face down, and missed the transfer date by 4 days for the first time in 6 years. The phone rang at 7 the next morning. My mother didn't raise her voice. Yelling, I could have fought. Her voice was flat and even, like she was reading me a receipt. She said the propane company had called about a past due notice in front of customers at the counter, which was mortifying. She said she'd had to comp 2 orders to smooth it over with regulars who'd overheard. And then she said the sentence I've carried in my chest for 5 years, the one this whole story runs on: "You don't get to be the one who's tired, Josephine. You're the one who made it out." I stood in my kitchen in the clothes I'd slept in, looked down at my own hands, and apologized twice. She accepted it once. I said I'd set the transfer to autopay so it could never slip again, and she said that would be best, and we hung up like a business and a client. What shames me now isn't that she said it. People will tell you exactly who they are if you let them talk long enough. What shames me is that I spent the whole drive to school agreeing with her, mentally rebuilding my calendar so nothing would ever again make me late for a payment to a diner that wasn't even mine. I was 30 years old, apologizing for falling asleep after a 60-hour work week. It would take something enormous to make me finally put the phone down. Life, being efficient about these things, had something scheduled. It was a Tuesday in February, mid-rehearsal, when the school secretary came to the Black Box Theater to find me, and I knew before she said a word, because I'd been the one sent to deliver news like that before, at other people's worst moments. A downed line during the storm cleanup, a cross arm that hadn't been de-energized the way the paperwork said it had been. Grady Pierce, 32 years old, was gone before the ambulance made it 2 blocks. His crew carried the casket, 6 linemen in borrowed suits, crying in a way I'd never seen grown men cry. All at once, no shame in it at all. My family did not come to the funeral. 4 hours was called a long drive on a work night. They sent a bouquet with a card signed to the Calder family in my Aunt Deb's handwriting, which told me my mother had delegated even the flowers. 5 days after the funeral, my mother texted me, "So sorry, Hone. Will the transfer still go through this month with everything going on?" I read that message standing in Grady's side of the closet, holding a flannel shirt that still smelled like cut cedar. I sent the money on time. I'm not telling you that with any pride. Grief makes you obedient before it makes you anything else. 3 weeks later, I fainted in the teacher's lounge, and a friend named Ophelia, yes, that's genuinely her name, her mother taught Shakespeare, drove me straight to urgent care. And in a bathroom with terrible lighting, 2 lines showed up on a test like a sunrise I had absolutely no plan for. Grief had wrecked my whole schedule for months. I'd assumed exhaustion was doing the rest. The ultrasound tech's math put me at 14 weeks. I did my own math in that dark little room, cold gel on my stomach, completely alone. I was going to be someone's mother in less than 6 months, and I was one phone call away from being nobody's daughter. I just didn't know that second part yet. I found it out on a Sunday. I planned the call the way I plan a tech rehearsal. Order of operations, no surprises. In the shower, I ran the script. Mom, Grady died. Mom, I'm pregnant. Mom, my blood pressure is already climbing and the doctor wants stress off the table completely, which means I have to stop sending money and keep every dollar and every heartbeat where I can watch them. In what order do you hand your mother a death, a grandchild, and a boundary? I led with the wrong one. She picked up on the second ring and I said, Mom, I have to stop sending the transfer. That's as far as I ever got. The line went off like a struck match. Ungrateful, after everything this family has done for you. So this is who you turned into. Who did I think paid for my ambition in the first place? Then the dial tone, flat as a monitor with nothing left to say. I called back twice. Voicemail both times. I sat on my bathroom floor and felt every word I never got to say settle back into my chest, like something swallowed wrong. That week, my blood pressure earned me a specialist, and the specialist used the phrase preeclampsia risk the way you'd say the word evacuate. Cut the stress down or spend the rest of the pregnancy on bed rest in a hospital bed. So I tried my father. I called and could hear the diner grill hissing behind him and said, Dad, please, something's happened. And Russ Calder, who once closed the diner early to watch me in a middle school play I had 4 lines in, said quietly, Don't push your mother right now, Joe. She's had a hard week. Not what happened. Not are you okay? Every road into that family ran straight through my mother, and my mother had closed the road. I set the phone face down on the counter and did not pick it back up. They could have asked one question. Just one. They never did. 4 hours away, my mother started telling a story. It just wasn't mine. I need you to understand exactly how the phrase cut us off got built, because nobody in my family ever told an outright lie you could quote back to them. It started with my Aunt Deb, my mother's sister and the diner's unofficial press office. 2 months after that phone call, she posted on the town's community Facebook group, praying for our girl through a hard season. Some kids forget where they came from. No names. In a town of 4,000 people, names weren't necessary. Then came the after-church breakfast crowd at the diner itself, the same booth of regulars every Sunday for 30 years. Somebody asked where I'd gotten to since I'd missed the diner's 40th anniversary cookout. My mother, I'm told, looked down at the coffee pot in her hand, let the silence go on until it curdled, and then said, We honestly don't hear from her much anymore, and touched a napkin to her eye. We honestly don't hear from her much anymore. Every word of that sentence is technically true. She didn't hear from me because she'd hung up before hearing was possible. That's the whole trick of it. By the next Sunday, one of the regulars was using the word estranged, and my mother didn't correct him. And a thing that goes uncorrected in a town that's small becomes fact by the following weekend. My mother never once lied outright. She just declined, again and again, to say the true thing, and dabbed her eyes at exactly the right moments, and let 200 regulars write the story for her. In the only courtroom she ever cared about, the counter at Calder's on a Sunday morning, grief like hers counted as evidence, and the absent daughter got tried without ever being called to testify. I knew none of this at the time. I was 4 hours south learning what swollen ankles meant, counting down to a due date, and I only found out the shape of it from Tricia, years later, ashamed, sitting at my kitchen table. But you should carry it with you through the rest of this, the way I've had to carry it since. So let me close the question I opened with. Why I actually stopped sending money. Because the truth was never spite, and it fits in one sentence. I had one salary, one dangerous blood pressure number, one baby on the way, and nobody left standing beside me to split any of it with. That's the entire scandal. The last months of that pregnancy, I built a life with the volume turned all the way down. I assembled a crib alone with an instruction video propped on a paint can. Ophelia took my worst grading weeks off my plate and told the school I was on light duty before I'd worked up the nerve to ask for it myself. The money that used to leave my account on the 15th stayed put and turned into a car seat and the last chunk of a down payment on the little house on Liberty Street, and a cushion for the weeks I wouldn't be able to work. It felt almost obscene at first, watching my own money just stay in my account. That's what 6 years of monthly cards does to a person's math. I moved in 7 months pregnant, Ophelia carrying everything heavier than a lamp, and Grady's brother-in-law helped me hang the porch swing off the beam. Grady had already measured and marked before the accident, like he'd known I'd need it finished by someone else. I painted the swing sea glass green before I'd even unpacked the kitchen boxes. And in my 8th month, I sat down and wrote one letter by hand, on real paper, to my grandmother, my father's mother, Vera, 79 that year, the only person in that whole family who ever preferred a hard truth to a smooth story. I told her everything, Grady, the baby coming in the fall, the phone call ended before it started. I gave her my new address in Boise, the only person in Idaho outside my own front door to have it, and asked for nothing except that she know. Then I watched the mailbox. 2 weeks, 6. The baby dropped. My ankles gave up entirely. The mailbox stayed empty. I told myself the postal service had lost it somewhere. The other option, that even Vera believed the town's version now, was too heavy to carry into labor. So I set it down on the floor of my mind and shut that door too. I had other things to carry. Wren Pierce arrived on a warm September morning, 3 weeks early, entirely unbothered by any of it. My blood pressure, which had threatened all summer, held just long enough, and the delivery moved fast. My daughter has never once waited politely for anything in her life. And honestly, I hope she never learns to. Ophelia stood where family is supposed to stand. She held my hand through the worst hour and narrated the whole thing like a sportscaster to keep me laughing between contractions. When it was over, she cut the cord, because somebody who loved us both should be the one to do it. They set 6 pounds of furious, dark-haired girl on my chest, and I want to tell you something about myself first. On my campus, in 6 years of directing teenagers through every kind of onstage disaster, I was famous for never once crying during a show. Every meltdown, every dropped line, every set piece that fell over during a performance, I stayed the calm one because somebody in the room has to. The woman who never cried, not gently, the kind that startles people because she was here and she was safe, and the 2 people who should have been pacing a waiting room with terrible vending machine coffee had no idea any of this was happening. One because he was gone. One because she'd hung up the phone. We named her Wren. Grady had picked that name off a bird feeder outside our apartment, trying names out loud like paint swatches, and when he landed on it, he'd grinned and said, her. I already know. So it was always hers. It took a lawyer and a stack of paperwork, but her father's name sits on the birth certificate of a girl he never got to meet. The little cedar shim he'd carved still hangs on a nail by our front door. Twine gone soft with age. I came home from the hospital with her 4 days later. Then I did the thing my family would eventually call cutting them off. I lived. Here's what 6 years of that looks like, compressed the way a whole semester compresses into a single closing night review. It turns out you can breathe remarkably well once you stop funding a second household you don't belong to. The mortgage on the little house got lighter every single year. The maple out front got tall enough to shade the swing by July. My daughter learned to walk on the slope of our front yard and immediately tried to walk off the porch steps, twice, which tells you everything about her personality. I moved to day classes only once. Wren started preschool. I learned to make pancakes shaped like alarmingly detailed dinosaurs, spending far more time on this than any reasonable adult should. Ophelia became godmother, then simply family, the kind you choose with your eyes wide open. And every December, I sent exactly one piece of mail north to my grandmother Vera. A card with a school photo tucked inside and my return address printed neatly in the corner. No phone number. No demands. One card a year, into that long silence, because some part of me refused to let the road grow all the way over. I never knew if she opened them or burned them. I never knew whose version of me she believed. That answer was coming, and when it arrived, it came inside a bread box. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What I want you to know about those 6 years is quieter than any of that. Somewhere in the middle of them, I stopped flinching every time my phone buzzed on the 15th of the month. Stopped drafting apologies to nobody in my head on the drive to work. Being needed by someone is not the same thing as being loved by them. It took me most of my 20s to learn the difference, and another 6 years to actually believe it. My daughter is going to get that lesson for free. I thought the story was finished, honestly. I thought peace was a place you gotta keep once you'd earned it. Then, on a Thursday in October, somebody knocked on my sea glass green swing's front door. To make sense of that knock, you need the wiser side of it, which I only got from Trisha afterward, in pieces, the way you hand back something you took without asking. In 6 years, the phrase "cut us off" had grown barnacles. There was a version where I'd fallen in with a controlling man who isolated me from everyone. There was a version involving money troubles I was too proud to admit to. My mother presided over every single one of them the exact same way. Never confirming. Never denying. Glowing very softly with martyrdom, the patient saint behind the register, the story cost her nothing and paid her weekly in sympathy refills and free pie. It might have run forever, except my grandmother Vera had a bad fall that spring. 84 that year, 2 nights in the hospital, home now with a walker, and apparently a new and complicated relationship with her own patients. Vera, who had spent 6 years saying almost nothing at Sunday dinners, stopped playing along entirely. She said it at the diner counter itself in front of the regular crowd, which is precisely the Calder family's version of a courtroom. Bring me Josie, or bring me a phone with her voice on it. I'm not leaving this earth listening to a story I know isn't true. Tricia says a fork actually stopped in midair over somebody's pie. So watch closely what my mother needed at that point because it wasn't her daughter. She'd had 6 years to want her daughter back and hadn't used a single one of them. What she needed was to produce me publicly, on her own terms, as a rescue. The prodigal returned, the mother vindicated, the story landing exactly where she'd always insisted it would. Within a week, Tricia, 26 now, cutting hair 3 towns over and still splitting rent with 2 roommates, was handed a slip of paper with my Boise address on it in our mother's careful hand. She didn't ask where Mom got it. She told me that later, staring into coffee she never actually drank. I should have asked you first, Joe. I know that now. Hold on to that. It matters more than she realized at the time. She drove the 4 hours with the radio off and knocked, softly, almost like an apology, which brings us back to the grating I'd been doing at my kitchen table. Through the front window, I could see a slice of her, a woman shifting her weight on my porch boards like they might send her a bill for standing there. It took a second, and then it took my breath. Tricia, 6 years older around the eyes, my little sister, standing on the far side of my sea glass door with my past folded up in her coat pocket. I stood with my hand on the latch for 3 full seconds. I've clocked worse decisions in far less time. 3 seconds is a long time. In the first second, I saw the version where I stayed silent and let her knock at a house that sounded empty, kept my peace, shook behind the couch for an hour like a fugitive in my own kitchen. In the second, I saw myself cracking the door 6 inches, giving her nothing, sending her home with a shrug for our mother, and spending every following Thursday flinching at knocks. In the third second, something clicked into place with the same cold clarity that only ever visits me backstage during a real emergency. I had done nothing wrong here. I'd built this house, this career, this daughter, Out of honest overtime and grief, nobody helped me carry. I was done running my life through the gap in a doorway, so I opened it all the way. The way you open a door for weather you've decided to stop pretending isn't already here. Hey, Trish, I said, and watched 6 years land on my sister's face all at once. She opened her mouth to answer, and that's the exact moment I heard bare feet slapping down the hallway behind me, the whole soundtrack of my hidden life arriving right on cue. Mommy, who's here? Here's what my sister saw, in the order she saw it. A girl, 5 years old, skidding into the hallway in mismatched socks. Dark hair, Grady's exact jaw, the Calder chin that shows up in every family photo going back 3 generations. My grandmother Vera's face, reprinted at 3.5 feet tall, asking who was at the door. Trisha made a sound like she'd been elbowed in the ribs. Then her eyes traveled past Ren, down the hallway wall I'd stopped consciously seeing years ago because I lived inside it. Grady's photo, funeral ribbon still folded over one corner of the frame, the ultrasound in its small silver frame beside it, and a snapshot Ophelia took of me 8 months pregnant, alone, standing in front of a half-painted sea glass swing with a brush in my hand. I watched my sister do math nobody had ever let her do before. The whole family mystery, 6 years of it, solved on a porch in 4 seconds. She went pale. She backed down my steps like the porch had started to tilt under her, phone already at her ear. And I heard it, the sentence you heard at the very beginning of this, the one that started everything ending. Mom, you need to sit down. She couldn't finish it. There was no ending to that sentence that didn't accuse somebody, and she wasn't sure yet who. She lowered the phone. My little sister sat down on my porch steps and cried into both hands. I brought her inside. What else do you do? She sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours and asked the one question no Calder had ever asked me. How did he die, Joe? And she listened to every word of the answer without once looking at her phone. At the door leaving, she set a folded flyer on the porch rail, careful, like it weighed more than paper should. My name written across the top in our mother's hand. Inside Calder's Diner, 50 years on Main Street, family celebration, Saturday the 25th. Everyone welcome home. She wants you there, Trisha said. She says she's going to make it right, Joe. Make what right, exactly? Trisha looked at her shoes. She didn't know, I did. Her taillights were barely off my street before the rest of the family had my number again. That night, a cousin added me back into the family group chat. The one still named unbelievably Calder Crew, with a little house emoji nobody had bothered to remove in 6 years. As if nothing had happened. As if I'd simply been out sick. By 2 in the morning there were 38 messages. I read every one of them with the phone lighting up the ceiling, and I watched in real time my mother's story shed one skin and grow another. The first messages were almost human. She's alive. Oh my gosh, is that really her house? Then around midnight, the new version arrived fully dressed, and you could tell exactly whose sermon it came from without her typing a single word herself. She hid a whole child from us. 6 years. My Aunt Deb, in her signature all caps grief. We deserve answers. A cousin posted a string of heart emojis under a photo Trisha had apparently described. A photo nobody had actually taken, of a niece none of them had ever met. Overnight in a single thread, I went from the daughter who left to the daughter who deceived. Same counter, same jury, brand new charge. And here's the detail I keep in the same pocket as everything else from that year. 38 messages, and I read every single one twice, standing in my kitchen while my daughter slept down the hall. Not one of them asked about the man in the funeral ribbon frame. Not one asked his name, or how he died, or how I'd carried a baby alone through the worst year of my life. Grief didn't have a line item on that family's ledger, so it simply didn't post. I put the phone in a kitchen drawer and went to bed. The next evening my mother called me herself. Nearly 6 years since the dial tone, I answered. I'm still not sure I don't regret that. She was crying before I finished saying hello. I want to be fair here. My mother's tears are real. Real the way rain on a stage is real. Actual water, perfectly timed. My baby, she kept saying. My baby had a baby. I stood at my kitchen window watching wren gather pink canes in the yard and let the whole weather system pass through. I said the only true thing I had ready. You could have known her since the day she was born, Mom. All you had to do was let me finish one sentence, a pause, a recalibration I could actually hear happening, grief switching tracks to strategy mid-breath. And then my mother, dry-eyed now, made me an offer. Come to the anniversary, sweetheart. Stand up front with me. I'll tell everyone you've been dealing with a lot. You have, haven't you, with everything that happened. Nobody has to know about the money at all. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I was too busy being impressed, the way you can be impressed by a flood while it's taking your porch furniture. Notice everything that sentence did. It diagnosed me retroactively with sympathy. It converted 6 years of silence into a comeback story with her holding the spotlight. And it buried the money, the transfers, the ledger, the actual reason any of this happened, under the diner's floor tile forever, with my own signature on the cover-up. My mother wasn't apologizing. She was offering me a supporting role in a better produced version of the same lie. She didn't want her daughter back. She wanted the rights to the story, and I was a licensing problem standing in the way of a clean narrative. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up and stood in my kitchen shaking, not with fear, which surprised me, with recognition. 2 nights later, my phone rang with a Wazer number I didn't recognize, and a voice I hadn't heard in 6 years said my full name like it had never once doubted it. My grandmother Vera. Tricia had given her the number, the first genuinely useful thing that flyer ever did. I sat down on my kitchen floor like gravity had been reissued, and for a second I couldn't say anything at all. She filled the silence like she'd been saving it up for years. She'd gotten every single one of my letters and cards. Every school photo, every December, kept somewhere safe. I'll tell you exactly where when I tell you what it meant. Why didn't you ever write back, Grandma? I asked, and hated how small my own voice sounded. 34 going on 9. Look at these hands, child, she said, dry as toast. They shake worse than a wet dog these days. And in that house, a letter leaving gets read at more checkpoints than a package at customs. Then her voice dropped into a register I'd never once heard from her. Quiet and level, like she was giving testimony under oath. I want you to hear this from me while I can still say it clearly. I never once believed the word cut off. Not for a single day. People don't cut themselves off, Josephine. They get pushed quietly by somebody who never wants a witness in the room. And I have sat at that woman's table the better part of 60 years watching exactly who holds the scissors. I pressed my hand over my mouth so she wouldn't hear what that did to me. 6 years. Telling myself I didn't need one single person in Idaho to believe my version. You really can live on that. You just find out what it cost you the moment somebody finally sets the bill down in front of you. Now, she said, brisk again, the way she always was before she let herself feel anything too long. I hear there's a little girl at your house with my face on her. Bring her to me while these old eyes still work. Not for the anniversary crowd. Just for a Saturday, just for us. So that settled it, almost. You already know it didn't stay a quiet Saturday. Before I tell you what happened inside that diner, let me ask you something. If the people who wrote you out of the story invited you back into a room where everyone still believes their version, would you walk in? Type yes or no in the comments below, because I promise you, by the end of this, you'll know exactly what I chose, and exactly what it cost me to choose it. Let me be clear about what I actually decided, because it wasn't courage. Not the way people usually mean that word. I decided not to go to the 50th anniversary party. I had zero interest in my mother's stage, her tearful comeback scene, her audience of 200 regulars ready to serve as jury. What I wanted fit on an index card. My grandmother's porch, my daughter on it, the two of them sharing an afternoon of October light before Vera's hands got any worse than they already were. So I built the visit the way I'd block a tight one-act. Timed, controlled, no exposure. Drive up Friday evening after school, 4 hours, which with a 5-year-old and her bladder becomes closer to 6. A motel off the highway on the far edge of town. 2 beds, a waffle maker in the lobby, paid for in advance. Saturday, all day at Vera's, phones down. Sunday morning, wheels pointed south before the anniversary party's first balloon was even inflated. I'd be a roomer again by the time the doors opened. In and out, 36 hours, and my mother's big scene could go on without its intended lead. Ophelia came over the night before we left and supervised my packing like she was proctoring a final exam. And when your mother finds out you're back in town, she said, wiser's a small pond, Joe news moves faster than gossip should physically be able to. Then I'll be on the highway before it cools, I said, and we both laughed, and I half believed it. I strapped Wren's booster seat in and tucked a folder of bank statements into my bag. Not to use, just to know exactly where it was. You keep the dangerous things locked up, but you keep them close. It was a decent plan. Honestly, it survived exactly one afternoon. My grandmother's house sits 2 blocks off Main, and it had shrunk the way childhood houses always do, and she was already out on the porch before I'd even cut the engine. Walker parked beside her chair, cardigan buttoned wrong on purpose. I think, just so she'd have a story ready, if anyone asked. 84 years old. Standing clearly cost her something real. I unbuckled Wren, and my daughter, who is shy with mail carriers and dentists and most adult strangers, walked straight up those steps like they already belonged to her. Vera put both shaking hands on that small face and just looked and looked and looked. There you are, she said to Wren, to me, to some version of all of us reaching back further than I can actually see. Inside, we had a whole ordinary Saturday. Soup beans, cornbread, an old soap opera Vera narrated like it was a horse race with real stakes. In the afternoon, she sent Wren to fetch the bread box off the top of the fridge and told her to dig underneath the stack of coupons. Every single Christmas card I'd ever sent her, rubber banded together, edges gone soft, the particular way paper goes soft when it's been read and reread instead of just filed away. My daughter's entire life, held together with a rubber band, hidden under grocery coupons in a bread box. Hidden. That word was doing all the heavy lifting in that sentence. Why under the coupons, Grandma? I asked, though I already felt the answer coming, the way you feel a bad line land wrong before the actor even finishes saying it. Vera looked at me steady. Because your mother went through my kitchen last Christmas looking for her good scissors, and she found these instead. She read every card, put them back exactly where they'd been. Never said one word about it to me or anyone else. Last Christmas, 10 months earlier, my mother had known my address for 10 months while the whole diner counter kept praying for her missing daughter. She'd never needed to find me. She'd needed me to stay lost. I was worth more to her that way. Here's how a town that's small actually works. At 4 that afternoon, a familiar sedan pulled up outside Vera's house, and my Aunt Deb climbed out holding a casserole dish she was allegedly returning. A dish, Vera muttered. She's been sitting on since Easter, mark my words. Deb had heard Vera had company. She'd come to see exactly what kind. What kind was 3.5 feet tall on the porch steps, teaching a stuffed rabbit to count pinekins one at a time. I watched my aunt's face run the same arithmetic I'd already seen once in that family group chat. She didn't stay 10 minutes. She hugged me on the way out, an inventory disguised as affection, and said, eyes suspiciously wet, "You look wonderful, honey." She's just precious. Your mama's going to be over the moon." Then the sedan was gone, moving with real purpose down the block. By supper time, Trisha texted me that the whole diner knew, all of it, the visit, the granddaughter, Vera's porch. And that evening, at the pre-anniversary staff dinner they held in the diner's back room, in front of the regulars and the extended family and a banner, some cousin had clearly made by hand, my mother stood up with one palm pressed to her chest and made it official. Trisha was there. She sent it to me almost word for word afterward, and I could hear my mother's exact cadence in every line of it. "This family has been through so much, and God has finally brought my girl home to Weezer. My daughter is in town with my granddaughter, and tomorrow, at this diner her own grandfather built, she is going to stand up here with me, and this family is going to be whole again in front of everybody who ever doubted us." "Applause, Trisha said. Actual applause. A couple of women cried into their napkins. I sat on a motel bed reading that text while my daughter slept 8 feet away. And what I felt first wasn't anger. It was something closer to vertigo. In one single afternoon, I'd been written into a show I had explicitly, clearly declined to appear in. My mother had sold every ticket to a performance whose lead had never once agreed to take the part, and the curtain was going up in about 14 hours. Then someone knocked on the motel door. It was Trisha, still in her staff dinner clothes, holding a battered accordion folder like it might bite her. "Mom's business folder," she said. "The real one, not the one she shows the accountant." She'd found it that spring digging through our mother's file box looking for Vera's insurance paperwork, and she'd been carrying what was inside it ever since. Unsure what to do with any of it, she set it on the motel desk and opened it to years I already knew by heart, because I'd funded every single one of them. "You should see where it actually went," she said. So I looked. The walk-in cooler. My walk-in cooler paid for twice. One line, repair, parts only, $180, Labor Dad and Russ Jr. from the co-op, favor. My father and a family friend had fixed that cooler themselves for the cost of a compressor part, while $300 a month kept leaving my account like clockwork. Where the rest actually went was all right there, in my mother's own handwriting. Church Building Fund under the Calder Family Memorial line. Rotary Club sponsorship under the Calder name, printed in the program every single year. The diner's own float in the county fair parade, 3 years running. Loans to a cousin's husband for a truck down payment, never repaid, never once mentioned again. Loans to Deb's son for community college tuition, same story. Every one of those debts logged and kept quietly alive, a whole little portfolio of people who owed my mother something they'd never actually be asked to repay out loud. My money hadn't been holding a struggling diner together at all. It had been buying my mother a throne in a fairly small kingdom, and a very long list of people who'd smile at her a certain way for the rest of their lives. I sat back, and the anger I'd been waiting 6 years to actually feel finally stood all the way up. And then Trisha flipped to the oldest page in the folder and pointed at a line dated the year our mother turned 23, and the anger sat back down again, quieter than I expected it to. Wedding ring, pond, grandpa's back taxes. A number small enough to break your heart clean in half. My mother had been 23 years old, married 11 months, and she'd sold her own ring to cover her father's debt to the county, and nobody had ever once paid her back for it either. "She's not spending your money for no reason, Joe," Trisha said quietly. "She's paying off a debt she's convinced every daughter in this family automatically owes." It didn't make anything okay. It made the whole thing sadder than pure anger and heavier to carry. Understanding my mother didn't obligate me to keep being her currency, but it did take revenge completely off the table. Whatever happened tomorrow, it wasn't going to be about winning. "The Corolla was your money," Trisha added at the door, wincing. "I'm going to pay you back for it, Joe, I promise." "The car was a gift," I said. Gifts were never the part of any of this that actually hurt. I didn't sleep much that night. The motel ceiling had a water stain shaped, I swear to you, like the outline of Idaho, and I lay under it running every possible version of the next day. Leave at dawn, skip the whole event entirely. Let the crowd absorb my absence however my mother chose to spin it. And she would spin it beautifully. I already knew the exact sermon coming. Something about a prodigal not quite ready for the light. Or go. Sit in the back somewhere. Be a quiet exhibit at somebody else's exhibition. Buy peace at the old familiar exchange rate one more time. I was still negotiating with that water stain when a small voice came from the other bed, half inside a dream. "Mommy, do I have a grandma?" She'd met Vera and landed on great-grandma easily enough. But she'd apparently been listening all day, the way kids always are exactly when you think the conversation's flying safely over their heads. And somewhere in that head of hers a gap had opened up that needed filling. I lay there in the dark and I did not answer. And the nod and swearing rang louder than anything I could have possibly said instead. Because here's what I finally understood, staring at water-stained Idaho on a stranger's ceiling. If I stayed silent tomorrow, my silence wasn't going to stay mine for long. My mother would fill it exactly the way she'd filled 6 years of it already. And someday, my daughter would sit in some kitchen and hear that her mommy was the woman who disappeared, who hid a whole child, who was too ashamed to stand in front of decent people. Silence had been my shelter for 6 years. From here on out, it was only ever going to be somebody else's material to work with. I got up, went into the bathroom, and by that thin yellow light, I read the anniversary flyer one more time. "Everyone welcome home" in her handwriting, that word doing so much work it should have been getting overtime. Wren rolled over in her sleep behind me, quietly, out loud to nobody at all in that rented room. I heard myself say it. I decided to go to the diner. Now let me tell you how I actually prepared, because it's the part I'd most like to be remembered for. I didn't print out bank statements. 6 years of transfer records sat in a folder back home in Boise, 4 hours south, and that's exactly where I left them, on purpose. I wasn't going to stand in that diner waving paperwork around like a process server. Ledgers were my mother's native language. I was finished speaking it to prove a point. I didn't write a speech either. I know exactly what I sound like reading off notes, like a substitute teacher working through somebody else's lesson plan, and I know what the truth sounds like once you've carried it word perfect for 6 years without ever getting to say it. There was no need to rehearse because there had been nothing but rehearsal every single 15th of the month, every unanswered card, every December. Instead, I did small, true things. I ironed my green dress with the motel iron, which fought me the entire time. I braided Wren's hair and let her pick the ribbon, and she picked orange against every color in the dress. And she was completely right about it. Light lipstick. Grady's little cedar shim went from the pocket of my overnight bag into the pocket of my dress. Not for anyone to see, just ballast, something solid to keep a hand around. Then I texted Trisha. Front row for Grandma Vera. Aisle side near the fan, she overheats fast. Wren and I are right behind her. She wrote back almost instantly, done. And Joe, I'm really glad. I sat on the motel bed for one last minute, checked my own pulse against my watch out of pure habit, and found it completely steady, which is the strangest true detail I own from that entire morning. I wasn't walking in with evidence. I was walking in with myself. That was the one thing nobody in that room had ever accounted for. Calder's diner seats about 70 on a normal day, and that Saturday it held every single one of those seats plus folding chairs down both side aisles and out onto the sidewalk. Cars lined Main Street 2 blocks in either direction. A hand-painted banner stretched over the front window. 50 years. Well, Kang Home family, clearly cut and glued by somebody's kids the night before. The ceiling fan stirred 200 paper programs like slow, patient applause. We came in during the mayor's opening remarks and took the seats Trisha had guarded with her whole body. Vera on the aisle, Walker parked beside her, good pearls on for the occasion. Wren and I right behind her, my daughter armed with a stuffed rabbit and that stubborn orange ribbon. Half the room turned to look, a wave of faces I'd known my entire childhood. And the temperature of all that looking was complicated in a way I don't have a clean word for. My father stood at the very back by the pie case, cap in both hands, the exact way he stands at funerals. And my mother wore her good blue dress and a handkerchief she plainly did not need, and a wireless microphone clipped to her collar like a broadcaster. After the mayor sat down, she stepped up in front of the counter. And the mic squealed once, and she waited that squeal out like a professional who'd done this before. She was good at this. I want that fact on the record, whatever record ends up existing. She thanked God for 50 years in hardship that always turns to joy eventually. She pressed that handkerchief to dry eyes at intervals a metronome would have envied. "My girl," she said, "has finally come home." And then she turned and found me in the second row and extended the microphone toward me like a communion plate, and said the line she had very clearly scripted for both of us in advance. "Josephine, honey, come up here and say a few words with your mama." 200 faces swiveled at once. The fans turned. Somewhere behind me a folding chair creaked like a ship taking on water. And there it was, the whole choice laid out as plainly as a stage direction. Stay seated, smile, wave, drive south again intact, and let her version of things settle permanently over my life and start creeping over my daughter's too. Or stand up and burn the one bridge that still had my name printed on it, the one marked daughter who might still, someday, come all the way home. There wasn't going to be a third version of me after this. I looked at Vera. My grandmother gave me a nod so small you'd have missed it if you weren't already starving for it. I let go of my folding chair. I stood up. I did not take the microphone she was holding out. Calder's Diner has terrible acoustics for a place that size, all hard tile and chrome, but a calm, level voice actually carries fine in a room like that. I walked to the front, hands empty at my sides, and I still can't entirely explain this part, not afraid. 6 years of managing 60 teenagers through every possible onstage disaster teaches you what an actual emergency feels like. This wasn't that. This was just the truth, finally, in a room with unexpectedly decent acoustics. "I didn't cut this family off," I said. "I stopped paying its bills. For 6 years in this family, those were treated like the exact same thing. You could hear the fans. You could hear a program slide off somebody's knee and nobody moved to catch it. $86,400. That's not a figure of speech. I kept every number. You're welcome to check my math with anyone in this room who ever borrowed against it." I watched that number land in 200 people all at once. Watched a handful of faces in the middle rows go very still, very fast. The faces belonging to a truck down payment and a semester of tuition. I didn't hold their eyes any longer than a single heartbeat. I hadn't come for them. The year I supposedly disappeared, I buried the man I loved, and I delivered our daughter completely alone. Nobody in this family asked me one single question. One question would have found me instantly. Then I turned to my mother, because the last of it belonged entirely to her, and I handed back the sentence she'd given me 5 years earlier, with a full 5 years of interest finally added on top. "I was allowed to be tired, Mom. Just never once, not one single time around you." The handkerchief came down. My mother, who had held a note of graceful sorrow through 6 straight years, who never once cracked at the counter, who could produce tears on command and stop them the same way, lost the room's tempo for the very first time in her whole performing life. "How dare you," she said, and the word dare split right down the middle, and the microphone in her hand rang harsh with it, too loud, electric. She was shaking. I wasn't. That's not a boast. I'd been quietly rehearsing calm since my very first year in a classroom full of teenagers, and she'd spent her whole life rehearsing an audience, and only one of those two skills holds up once the script actually runs out. I never once raised my voice in that room built for coffee shop chatter. Quiet, it turns out, is the loudest possible thing you can bring into a place like that. Here's what the truth actually cost, itemized. Since my family raised me on totals, the room split like water moving around a stone right in front of me. In real time. Some faces going soft in my direction, some going to stone. And the stone ones included people I had genuinely loved. Mrs. Hargrove, who taught me to read sheet music in the church choir as a kid, studied her own hands like they'd suddenly become unfamiliar. A regular who used to slip me extra pie as a kid shook his head slow, the exact way you shake your head at a shame. And I understood, watching him, that in his version of this story I was the shame, and that he was probably going to believe that for the rest of his life, and that no document I owned would ever reach him. That's the tax nobody warns you about. The truth doesn't convince every single person in the room, it just stops the lie from being unanimous. And I felt the other thing go too, the thing I'd actually been paying for this whole time without fully realizing it. Somewhere in that diner, the daughter who might someday be fully welcomed back, forgiven into the fold by some eventual miracle of her mother's better nature, restored to every future holiday table, that version of me died standing right there. I'd killed her myself. On purpose. I'd grieve her later, probably. I knew that even as it happened, and I stood there anyway, because she'd been costing me absolutely everything, and paying out in a currency nobody could actually spend. Then I did the one thing I'd genuinely come to do. I stepped back to our row and took my daughter's hand and walked her the few steps forward to where Vera sat, in full view of 200 people who'd spent 6 years praying for a missing woman who had never once actually been missing. "Wren," I said, "this is your great-grandma Vera. She's the whole reason I still believe in this family at all." My grandmother put both shaking hands on that small face, her own expression made entirely new, and the room watched a great-grandmother meet a child they'd been told for years didn't exist. Even most of the stone faces had trouble holding their shape through that part. Some things simply outrank a narrative. Not many things. That's one of them. Then I picked my daughter back up, nodded to Tricia to help Vera along, and walked the length of Calder's diner for the last time in my life. Past the middle rows. Past Deb, who was staring at the number I'd said out loud like it was still hanging visibly in the air in front of her face. Because for her, it absolutely still was. She knew exactly which line of that folder had her own son's name written next to it. Past booth after booth of people choosing, right there in real time, which version of this story they were going to carry forward for good. My mother stepped away from the microphone stand as I came level with her. And here's the strangest mercy of that entire day. What she said it quietly, mic lowered to me alone, no audience left listening. For the first time in 6 years, maybe in 40, my mother said something that hadn't been staged for anybody. Everything I ever did, I did for this family. And she meant it completely. That's the part that will never stop being sad to me. I could see straight down that whole sentence, all the way back to a 23-year-old girl at a pawn shop counter, sliding her wedding ring under the glass. Learning forever what a daughter in that family was apparently for. I stopped. I looked at my mother, one arm full of the granddaughter she'd traded for a better produced story. And I said it just as quietly, just for her, the sentence I'd spent 30 years earning the right to say. Being needed and being loved were never the same bill, Mom. I just finally stopped paying the wrong one. Her face did something I had never once seen it do in my entire life. I didn't stay to try naming it. I walked on, and somebody pushed open the diner's front door, and October came in cold and clean and completely indifferent to any of it. Wren squinted up at me from my hip. "Is the party over?" she asked. "Ours is," I said, and we walked out into daylight. We were almost to the car when I heard gravel moving fast behind us. And it was Tricia, one shoe half off, out of breath, having left Vera safely with the walker and the car door open, and the heater already running. Thorough as always, she stood in front of me in that parking lot with both hands open, The way a person stands when they want you to see they're not carrying anything. She didn't defend our mother. I want that noted somewhere, whoever keeps a record of this family now. She didn't say she means well, or you know how she gets, or any of the sentences that had upholstered my entire childhood. She'd stopped carrying our mother's messages the day she sat down and cried on my porch steps. She just looked at her niece, already half asleep on my shoulder before we'd even reached the car, and then at me, and asked for the one single thing nobody in this family had ever once asked me for. Can I come see her sometimes? No cards, no asking for anything. Just me being her aunt. Just an aunt, 26 years old, and it was the single bravest sentence anyone in the Calder family had said out loud in a decade. Sundays, I told her, bring nothing but yourself. She nodded like I'd just handed her something fragile and genuinely valuable, because I had. We pulled onto the highway before the anniversary cake was even cut. Nobody followed us. Nobody needed to. That particular part of the story was already over. 5 weeks later, on a mild Saturday in November, my grandmother Vera sat on my porch swing in Boise. Tricia had driven her down 4 hours and reported with real satisfaction that Vera's opinions on the radio the entire way constituted a genuine crime against music. She had the bread box balanced on her lap, teaching Wren to thread a needle for a quilt square, both of them squinting, 4 hands shaking for 2 entirely different reasons. And when the thread finally caught, they cheered like they'd won something enormous. My mother's letter arrived the Tuesday before. 3 pages, her handwriting, her version. A season of hardship, a daughter overwhelmed by grief. Scripture about honoring your parents. The word sorry appeared exactly 0 times in any sentence that actually carried weight. I read it once, standing at the kitchen counter, folded it, put it in a drawer, and went back to making dinner. It hurt less than I'd budgeted for. That's the honest surprise. Not that it stopped hurting, but that the wound had finally stopped bearing weight it was never built to carry. Through Tricia, who calls every single Sunday on video now so Wren can show off her latest alarming dinosaur pancake, the news trickles south. My mother stepped back from running the diner's books entirely, citing her health. A few relatives who'd quietly borrowed against my money over the years have started pressing small and asked for cash into Vera's hands, who takes it without comment and buys thread with it. Deb still calls the extended family every Sunday afternoon like clockwork. The machine keeps running. It simply runs without me inside it now. My father sent a card of his own eventually. Inside, in pencil, 1 single line. I'm sorry I looked away, Joe. I've kept it. I haven't written back yet. Some doors take more than 1 coat of paint before they're ready to hold. I'm allowed to take my time with that now. That's rather the entire point of everything I just told you. And yesterday, Wren and I put a fresh spring coat on the porch swing early, just because the weather held. Her with her own small brush, paint on her elbow, on the porch rail, on the family dog. The color's still called sea glass. She's already decided it belongs to both of us. If you've ever had to keep paying into a story you never actually agreed to be a character in, take that as your sign tonight. And if somebody you love needs to hear this too, go ahead and send it their way. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I read every single one, and hit that subscribe button because I've got a lot more of these to tell you.